Today on Inside Utah Politics, medical marijuana. An Ogden City firefighter placed on unpaid leave for refusing to give up his medical cannabis card is suing the city. We're breaking down the case with Salt Lake Tribune columnist Robert Gerke. And lawmakers in the nation's capital calling for an overhaul of the country's asylum system. Why they say now is the time.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It's time to go inside Utah politics, and we do begin this morning with Salt Lake Tribune columnist Robert Gerke. Robert, always glad to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be it.
You're getting into some interesting cases over the last week. Let's start with medical marijuana and an Ogden firefighter. You go in great detail outlining the case and taking a look at all of the different angles. What's at the center of this?
So at the center of it, I guess, is something that we kind of anticipated for a long time, and that is when these first responders have medical marijuana cards, does that square with the departmental policy? And so Ogden City, this firefighter, Levi Coleman, got his medical marijuana card in June of this year as a result of some back pain that he'd had for a long time. And in August, the city enacted this new policy that requires officers, firefighters to let their bosses know if they're taking any substances that might impair their judgment. Coleman complied with the policy and was a short time later put on unpaid leave. Since the 1st of September, he's been burning vacation time and sick leave and not getting paid to do this job that he's been hired to do. So he sued the city to get his to be put back on the force, basically, to be put back in service. And so there's some negotiations going on right now. This is, from all indications, the first such case in the country. Actually, the head of the firefighters union told me that they haven't seen this anywhere else. And so it's sort of a landmark case. They're trying to work it out. 3 other Ogden firefighters had relinquished their cards voluntarily. And I was also told that some unified firefighters had relinquished their cards in accordance with this policy.
Yeah, so definitely not the first one. So much to dig into here. Let's start with something you alluded to, a potential settlement. Do you see this case going through the courts, or are they going to reach an agreement?
You know, I think eventually they're going to reach an agreement. The legislature is stepping into this to make clear that they wanted to protect public employees from, adverse actions in the workplace as a result of having a medical marijuana card. Now the city says, well, it's not that he's using the drug, it's a medicine. Under state law, is treated the same as any other medicine you take, but they're doing it because he actually has this card. And so, I think eventually they're going to have to come up with a policy. I think it'll probably entail something about, you can't use it 24 hours before you're on duty or something of the sort. Now, if he had shown up to work impaired, obviously under state law, that you wouldn't want that, and
Sure.
the employer can go ahead and take action. But there's no indication, and nobody alleges that he ever showed up impaired.
Right. One thing from the city's point of view, though, was being called in on an off duty. So how do you balance that 24-hour period with the possibility of being called into work?
Yeah, I mean, that's something they're going to have to navigate. From what I was told, it doesn't actually work that way. There's sort of rotation to it and so forth. You're not, at the spur of a moment going to be called up and unable to perform. The other thing that I think is kind of telling about this is that you have these paramedics and firefighters who are trained to recognize when people are impaired. And so it's not like he's going to show up at work and nobody's going to notice if he's perhaps impaired. And again, it never has happened that's the case. The other thing I think that is kind of problematic with this is that these public employees have a protection that no other Utahn really enjoys, right? If you work for a state or local government, you're covered by this state law. If you're just a resident who uses medical marijuana as medicine, you have no workplace protections. And I think that's something the legislature really needs to take a careful look at.
Yeah, and there are plans in the works for this legislative session. What can we expect to see come of that?
Yeah, well, I think the bill that would clarify that you can't be, fired or have adverse action taken because you have a medical marijuana card is going to sail through. Clearly, that's not what they intended. But there's a number of other medical marijuana bills. It's sort of an ongoing refining process that we're going through. to try to get this right, and so we'll watch that closely in January.
And at the crux of this story, we have state law versus what the city feels like it can move forward with, and you draw the conclusion of what? That the city is violating state law?
I mean, it's pretty clear that the city is at least violating the intent of the state law, and that's why I kind of think at the end of the day that Levi Coleman's going to end up back on the job. You know, but again, the city says they're trying to balance the safety of citizens, the safety of firefighters, with the individual firefighters' right to use the medication. And so they're going to have to strike that balance. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, we'll come up with something that is permissive to let these firefighters use this medicine as if it were any other medicine. You don't want to, certainly don't want to push them more towards, say, opioids. I mean, that doesn't solve the problem at all, and so it shouldn't be treated any differently than that sort of medicine.
All right, let's move on to another big topic you've written about lately. That's affordable housing. We saw the governor's proposal, and you like what you see from that proposal. Talk about why. Yeah,
I mean, I think this was really encouraging. We've talked a long time about the tight housing market, the soaring home prices, and then homelessness. I mean, you know, it seems sort of common sense, but I think that the solution to homelessness is more homes and getting people in homes and getting people in homes with the support that they need to keep them there. So the governor actually came up with a very aggressive proposal, about $128 million going toward supportive housing, and this is really critical because in about 95% of the cases, when you get somebody into one of these homes and give them the support they need, whether it's mental health support, behavioral health support, or the like, they stay in these homes and they get back on a path where they're not constantly in and out of housing and back on the street.
Right.
So it really is the long-term solution, the only long-term solution to the problem. It's about $128 million in federal COVID money that they want to apply there. They want to put another $50 million into developing affordable housing units, things like the tiny home project that I know you talked to Mayor Mendenhall about, projects like that, requiring maybe hotels and converting them into affordable housing units. And then they want to put $50 million into rehabbing rural Utah homes. We think of this as sort of an urban problem, a Salt Lake City or Wasatch Front problem, but outside of the Wasatch Front, a lot of these homes have fallen into disrepair, and so if you can put some money into getting those renovated, getting people in them and making them affordable, you really go a long ways to addressing the problems in, say, tourist communities like you know, Moab or the like.
And when you take a look at some of these options you mentioned, it's really about doing things differently, maybe the way we haven't done before. Is that what we really need to look at here? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a scope, certainly, that it's a size of commitment that we haven't seen before. And I think, you know, when you talk to the advocates, you talk to people with the Housing Coalition, you talk to people who have worked on these issues for a long time, they're really encouraged to see this recommendation, and we have to emphasize that this is just a recommendation, and it will ultimately be up to the legislature to decide whether that much goes there and where else it might go. But you know, you see sort of a coalescing, and I think former Senate President Wayne Niederhauser, you know, was very supportive of this. They've been asking for a big commitment. There are some people were saying, well, couldn't they have done more? And perhaps they could, but there's also a problem of being able to spend that much money. You know, you get a backlog when you try to force that much money through the system. So they're very encouraged and think this will be a good start.
Right, and as you point out in your article and just now, it is up to the legislature.
Yeah.
Do you get a sense that they're going to sign off on most of this, though?
You know, I think you see an eagerness, a willingness on behalf of the legislature to really take this issue on in a way we haven't seen before. There was some money that was put into affordable housing before COVID, money that got pulled back later on. You have, you know, senators like Jake Andrick who are really leading out on this issue and have been for a number of years. I think it's important and can really stabilize our housing market and get these people into a long-term viable option.
Yeah, hard to move forward if you don't have a place to call home, no doubt about that. Robert, let our viewers know where they can follow your work.
Yeah, you can check it out at sltrib.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at Robert Gerke.
All right, thanks so much for your time. As always, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn.
Coming up, a Utah representative says the president's boycott of the Olympics doesn't go far enough. He says even athletes shouldn't be going. Our panel debates that a little later. But first, addressing Muslim bias, the details of a bill being debated in the nation's capital. We'll get to that right after the break. Welcome back. 1 week after the U.S. government reinstated the Trump-era Remain in Mexico program, lawmakers now renewing their push for immigration reform. Under the program, asylum seekers who now arrive to the southern border will be sent back to Mexico. Washington correspondent Anna Warnicki has the latest.
Now that the courts have ordered the Biden administration to bring back President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy, Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn says fixing the asylum process is even more urgent.
Unless we change some of our policies and procedures with regard to asylum, then people are going to continue to come across and turn themselves in, knowing they can beat the system.
But Cornyn says the Biden administration refuses to get on board.
They've shown absolutely no interest.
What I like about this administration's approach is they're not being political about it.
Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton defended the Biden administration for how he says it's handled the border situation it inherited from the Trump administration.
They're really putting all the options on the table.
DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says the department has already made changes to the asylum system to make it safe and humane.
The migrants are tested, cohorted during transportation, isolated and quarantined as necessary.
But Mayorkas called the Trump-era policy cruel. He says the Biden administration will continue to abide by the Supreme Court's order to reinstate it while the Justice Department fights to reverse the ruling. In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
Democrats are poised to pass a bill in the House to help fight anti-Muslim hate by creating a special office. But as Washington correspondent Alexander Lamone reports, Republicans oppose the bill, saying it's being rushed and could have unintended consequences.
A lot of this arose because of a bigoted joke.
Democrats say whether it's around the world or in the halls of Congress, Islamophobia is a serious problem that should be addressed.
Never sympathizing with terrorists. Unfortunately, Ilhan can't say the same thing.
Democrats say those types of comments are part of the reason Congresswoman Ilhan Omar introduced a bill to create a State Department office led by a special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Muslim hate.
We want to prevent Islamophobia. We want to call it out wherever we see it and make sure that it is part of a report.
I fail to see anything partisan about the underlying bill here.
And I'm not sure it's a partisan issue at all.
Republicans say the bill isn't ready to be passed and needs to better define terms like Islamophobia and harassment.
What constitutes harassment or those sorts of things, or is it just something that, sort of like pornography, you know when you see it?
No, I think that it's something like the anti-Semitism bill that we've passed almost unanimously.
Republicans say they won't support the bill for fear of unintended consequences.
Counterterrorism efforts from Israel, would that be considered anti-Muslim?
Even after passage in the House, the bill will have a hard time overcoming blocks by Republicans in the Senate. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Still to come, Utah lawmakers are talking tax cuts for next year, but what is the most effective way to get it done? Our panel debates after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representative Andrew Stoddard and former Speaker of the House Greg Hughes. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Great to have you.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Let's start off with the Olympic boycott. We saw Utah Representative Chris Stewart come out during the week saying the president's diplomatic boycott was not enough. He wants a full-on boycott. Greg, let's start with you. Your thoughts on that?
I support it. I think that boycott lights aren't really going to send the message that you want. I think that China has been incredibly aggressive in a very dangerous way. And if this isn't a moment where not just the United States, but other countries, not just diplomatic boycotts, but boycotting these games, I don't know when you would do something like that. And I think that you have the Muslim Uyghurs or Uyghurs, the concentration camps that are going on. You have, you just have a lot of things happening where China is becoming more aggressive. you got to draw a bright line. And I know that we have great athletes that have prepared hard for these games, but this is supposed to be the world coming together. These are nations coming together. And I think that you can't have venues like Beijing in times like this to have the Olympic Games. I think it's, I support Representative Stewart.
Representative Stoddard, this is a split within our delegation. Senator Romney, of course, calling and supporting for the diplomatic boycott, asking other countries to join. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the diplomatic boycott is perfect. I mean, you look at the Olympics and it's something that unites us as a country, and to boycott that as a whole, I get that it's an important message that we need to send, and that we need to send some sort of message to China, but I don't think it should be at the expense of our athletes and our nation.
Greg, you hit on that, but let's talk about that a little bit more. These are people who have prepared their whole lives. They've had their sights set on this since they were kids. They've been working hard. So why should they not have that opportunity to go and compete?
You never take something like this lightly. I know that there's talk that the 1980 boycott that President Carter did when the USSR invaded Afghanistan was an important message to not attend Moscow because of that aggression. And there is still, it's still a raw and an unpleasant and hard moment for a lot of Olympians that were not able to compete in those games. But I don't know who would look back at those times when the USSR was being that aggressive and shrug their shoulders and going, man, I wish we would have played. It does have its consequences, and it's not fair. But that's what happens when you have tyrants, when you have countries that are acting in ways that make the planet more dangerous. And you've got to find ways to really make that statement. It would be a far greater statement and a real statement if you saw these boycotts of the Beijing Olympics, because they deserve it.
So full boycott or diplomatic boycott, does either of them really change anything within China, Representative?
I don't think so. You know, you look at all the backlash they've gotten from so many different arenas, and I think ultimately they're going to keep doing what they're doing, unfortunately.
Greg, that same question to you. Either one, what really impact does it have on China?
I think the diplomatic one will go unnoticed. I don't know how many countries. I know Australia has agreed to boycott diplomatically as well. There's other countries that have. I don't think it'll even be mentioned. If it were a real boycott and you saw these nations absent in these games, I think it would make a difference. And I think that China would lose face in a moment like that when the world comes together, and rightly so. And so I do think it would make a difference if there was a true and full boycott of our Olympic Games.
Let's move on to tax cuts. It's a big topic of conversation right now. Of course, we saw the governor's proposal going toward a food tax credit. Other lawmakers talking about maybe going an income tax route instead. Representative Stoddard, let's start with you. Your thoughts on the governor's proposal?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think in terms of what we're looking at for a tax cut, it's the best way to do it. It's going to go to the people who actually need a tax cut. You know, we have a huge surplus this year, which is fantastic. Our state's growing. We've had a great economy considering everything that's going on. But we do still have a lot of people in need, and this would be a way to be able to give back to them and help them.
Greg, do you like the food tax credit idea?
You know, I like the concept and I like the idea, especially when you see inflation going up as much as it is. It's hitting every family. Every working family is feeling the inflation. 6 to 10% is like a 6 to 10% decrease in your income when you're buying food and when you're buying other items. So the tax on food is going to be felt, I think, dearly by everyone in the weeks and the months and the years that we're in right now. So I love the concept. My only concern is, does the water get to the end of the row? Do the people that most need the relief of a food tax and have that removed or rebated back, are their accountants going to get them that credit so they can claim it on their tax returns? Are we talking about people that will have the ability to or will file their taxes in a way to where the word's out, people know about it, and will be able to get that tax credit, food tax credit? I worry about that. I don't know that. I want to see how that system is going to play out and how we make sure that those that are in need are able to take advantage of that food tax credit. Yeah. But across the board, families are going to be feeling the crunch of inflation and the cost of living going up the way it is. And so we need to, I think lawmakers need to find a way to find that tax relief.
Already are feeling that, no doubt about it. Representative, your thoughts on the point Greg brings up, as will those who really need it be able to go through the process of getting the credit?
Yeah, and that's my concern as well. You know, obviously we need to make sure that people are able to get this as opposed to just sounding nice and then no one applying for it. But I do like that this is targeted towards the people who need it most, and hopefully there's some programming there to help those get that.
Okay, let's move on to another big story during the week. President Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, found the Congress voting to hold him in contempt of Congress, criminal contempt. We saw some pretty interesting text messages come out in that process as well. His son, Donald Trump Jr., saying he's got to condemn ASAP. Other Fox News hosts saying, destroying everything you have accomplished, encouraging the president to get out in front of this and put an end to it. Greg, your thoughts on what we saw unfold this week?
I don't know why that's news. I think that if I watch Fox News, so I don't have to hear from pundits or CNN commentators tell me what was actually said during the time and aftermath of the violence on January 6th. Republicans, Fox News commentators have been very consistent through the year 2020, condemning all the violence and all the riots and all the destroying of federal
But they were
buildings.
calling on the president to do it here,
Absolutely.
were they not?
I mean, I don't know why that's a shock to anyone. Why wouldn't they be? I mean, are we?
So
I
did
don't
the
even
president
understand what the
appropriately
controversy
address
is.
that in your view?
Pardon me?
Did the president appropriately address that on that day in your view?
Yes, I think he came in front of the television twice that day, telling people to stand down and go and to depart from the Capitol. I'll tell you this: people have said that the Fox News commentators who sent those texts were hypocritical in their coverage of that day. Go back and watch. They were condemning the violence, and they were condemning that just as they had the violence the year prior. You don't see that kind. You see more selective outrage and logic on the Democrat side in terms of what violence and what riots they were okay with sending. You know, Kamala Harris had a bail fund that she was creating for those that were arrested in riots, and then condemning what happened on January 6th. I would argue that you saw Republicans and you saw these news commentators. They were very consistent about condemning violence from any side.
Okay, Representative, your thoughts on what we saw unfold this week?
Yeah, I mean, and I have to courteously disagree. I think this is completely newsworthy, and I think it's not getting enough news coverage. Obviously, this is something that has changed our nation, and anything that comes out regarding it, we should focus on. You know, this was an assault on democracy, and our president at the time didn't do enough to stop it, and in fact did the opposite to encourage it, and I think we need to still hold the people accountable who are promoting violence.
So what will ultimately happen? Where should it go from here? Representative, I'll give you the first shot on that.
Yeah, you know, I wish a lot of these people would participate in these hearings because I think it would be nice to have answers as to what went wrong and why things happened the way they did. And so I don't like to see these contempt charges because I wish that the people would just give the answers that we're looking for.
All right, Greg, let's go over you. What about that point? Why not just go to the hearing and talk about what the commission wants to hear?
Well, I think I don't think it's a fair process. I think it's been weaponized. Came out yesterday or today that a text that was attributed to Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio was actually a portion of a text, and it was actually him forwarding a legal analysis where the paragraph was stopped, the sentences that were shared were misleading, and that has had to be acknowledged. And it's sad because the problem is you're weaponizing this. We're weaponizing our political offices in a way that, again, selective outrage, selective logic, and I don't think it's a thorough or fair process at all. I wouldn't play in that circus at all.
All right, we have about 30 seconds left. Representative, is this a fair process? Is it being weaponized?
It's a fair process, and what's being weaponized is the speech that we saw from our former president as well as his supporters that continue to use hateful and violent speech.
All right, Greg, we do have about 15 seconds. I'll give that to you.
Just look at America right now. Look at the crime that's up, the violent crime. Look at the violence that happened all through 2020 and even the violent crime we see growing today. This did not come from the Republican side. It didn't come from President Trump. You've had this excusing of violence. You had the Capitol Hill autonomous zones, the Chaz zones, that were, if that isn't the definition of riots and insurrections, I don't know what would be.
All right.
We've seen this. We lived through it. You can't keep pointing at President Trump in the times that we're in right now.
Okay, we have run out of time, gentlemen. Thanks so much for your insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The general legislative session beginning next month. State lawmakers will gather at the state capitol on Tuesday, January 18th for opening day. Governor Spencer Cox will deliver his State of the State address a few days after that on January 20th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Just log on and search Glenn Mills ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.